answer what does it mean to be an American in the year 2024. It means we believe in the ideals of 1776. It means we believe in merit, that the best person gets the job regardless of their skin color, that you get ahead in this country not on the color of your skin, but on the content of your character and your contributions. That's why we're done with the woke DEI agenda, bringing in meritocracy to America. It means we believe in the rule of law, and I say this as the kid of legal immigrants to this country. That means your first act of entering this country cannot break the law, and that is why if we've had the largest influx of illegals into this country in American history, we will have the largest mass deportation in American history. That is not racist or xenophobic. That is what it means to stand for the rule of law in the United States of America. It means we believe in self-governance, that the people we elect to run the government, for God's sake, ought to be the ones who actually run the government, not unelected bureaucrats in the deep state that are running the show today. So you want another mass deportation? Let's get 3 million federal bureaucrats out of the D.C. bureaucracy. That's the mass deportation that saves the country. What does it mean to be American? It means we have elections we can trust and believe in, and that means single-day voting on Election Day as a national holiday with paper ballots and government-issued ID to match the voter file. That's how we save the country after we win it this time by voting early. These are not black ideas or white ideas. They are American ideals that set this country into motion. We're in a war to revive them, and right now we need the commander-in-chief who will lead us to victory. That is your next president, Donald J. Trump. If you want to seal the border, vote Trump. If you want to restore law and order in this country, vote Trump. If you want to grow the economy in this country, vote Trump. If you want to revive national pride in this country, vote Trump. If you want to stay out of World War III in this country, vote Trump. If you want to make America great again, vote Trump.
Hello, Milwaukee. Hello, America. I'm Eric Schmidt from the great state of Missouri, the Show Me State. It's not lost on me how unlikely my presence is on this stage. As the grandson of a butcher, the son of a man who worked 7 days a week in the midnight shift, my blue-collar roots run deep. And I'm proud the Republican Party is the party of working families. Missouri is home to cities named Liberty and Independence, and towns called Freedom and Defiance. So it should come as no surprise that we are sick and tired of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And I am here with a simple message. Enough is enough. We're ready to take our country back. Under Joe Biden, the rule of law has disintegrated. Crime is rampant. Our communities are under siege, and our brave law enforcement officers are constantly being vilified. He stood idly by as liberal DAs and mayors pushed to defund the police agenda and empowered criminals, all while endangering law-abiding citizens. Kamala Harris shares in these failures. She campaigned as a progressive prosecutor and even called for us to reimagine public safety. Americans don't need to reimagine safety. We know exactly what safe communities look like. But the weakness and the wokeness of the Biden-Harris administration has made us less safe. Biden and Harris opened our border to terrorists, to criminals. They allowed drug cartels to flood our communities with Chinese fentanyl that's killing more than 200 Americans each and every day. It doesn't have to be this way. As Missouri's former Attorney General, I went toe-to-toe with the radical defund the police crowd and had the backs of our men and women in blue. When Soros-backed officials refused to prosecute violent criminals, I stepped in and put those dangerous felons behind bars. And I know President Trump will do the same. He'll restore law and order. He'll unapologetically back the blue. And President Trump will secure the border once and for all. I believe in an America where our best days are ahead of us. I believe in an America where moms and dads can raise their kids in safe communities. And I believe in an America where we defend the police, not defund the police. President Trump will make that dream a reality, and that's why we need him back in the White House. Ladies and gentlemen, a vote for President Trump is a vote to make America safe again. Thank you. God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.
However, America needs a military clear-sighted and not distracted by woke ideology. As Churchill reportedly said, people sleep peacefully in their beds at night only because rough men stand ready to do violence on their behalf. Churchill would be shocked to know that the American military that saved the day during World War II now pays for confused individuals to surgically change their sexual appearance. America still needs rough men and women for our defense. Instead of spending $500,000 taxpayer dollars to remove the manhood of soldiers, let us today demand that that money be spent on the salaries of the rough men and women defending America. Defending America means not letting our military mission be overridden by left-wing agenda unrelated to military readiness.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle have been hard at work removing statues and renaming military bases because they believe they can and should erase history. The Board on Geographic Names was initially designed to be part of the United States Geological Survey to ensure uniform naming on maps. However, when Secretary Haaland took over as Secretary of the Interior, she immediately repurposed the Board on Geographic Names into the Interior's Department's woke renaming board. One of the Secretary's top priorities was to deem the word squaw derogatory and remove any word with squaw in it from any geographic landmark or unincorporated town. And she pursued this policy using the Board on Geographic Names. This affected my district because the board changed the name of unincorporated Squawberry to Partridgeberry despite the opposition of local leaders. This is complete government overreach, and it is unacceptable to allow the federal government to force their ideals down the throats of East Tennesseans. This is not what the government is supposed to be tasked with, and I question how long it will be until Secretary Haaland decides to turn her attention to every geographic landmark named for Columbus or Washington or Jefferson. I do not trust this administration to discontinue using the Board on Geographic Names to push their agenda onto Americans, and for this reason, I believe we need to prohibit funding for the Board on Geographic Names. And I ask my colleagues to support the passage of this important amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time, sir.
The gentlewoman reserves. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Maine seek recognition?
I claim time in opposition to the amendment.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
This amendment is one more controversial poison policy rider that sadly shows that extremist Republicans are not interested in bills that can gain bipartisan support and become law. The U.S. Board of Geographic Names is a federal body created in 1890 and established in its present form by public law in 1947 to maintain uniform geographic name usage throughout the federal government. The board is comprised of representatives of federal agencies concerned with geographic information, population, ecology, and management of public lands. In this age of geographic information systems, the internet, and homeland defense, geographic names data are even more important. The board works in partnership with federal, state, tribal, and local agencies, and more than 50 nations have some type of national names authority. My Republican colleagues should be more focused on creating bills that will garner bipartisan support and become law, not prohibiting funding for a board that helps surveyors, map makers, and scientists and serves the federal government and the public as a central authority to which name problems, name inquiries, name changes, and new name proposals can be directed. I urge my colleagues to reject this amendment, and I reserve.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look, this is really a simple concept. If you don't think the federal government should be changing the names of localities, especially with the opposition of locals, support my amendment. This is federal overreach, plain and simple. And with that, sir, I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields. The gentlewoman is recognized.
It's yours. Sorry. I know. Yield back.
Gentlewoman yields.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in favor of my amendment, which would prohibit federal funding for the Countering Group Extremist Activity Working or implement any recommendations from the group. In 2021, Democrats and the Biden regime unjustly used January 6th to prop up this woke working group to provide cover for unjustly targeting members of our military. The so-called Countering Group Extremist Activity Working has been weaponized and implemented to almost exclusively target Republicans, conservatives, and libertarians serving in the military. And yet, by its own metrics, it has been a massive waste of money and time. The Defense Department continues to spend large amounts of time and money to combat extremism, yet its own analysis of the situation shows that it's entirely unnecessary. In fact, fewer than 100 service members have been subject to the discipline due to engagement in extremist activities. That's only 0.005% of the approximately 2.1 million active and reserve personnel. Clearly, extremism is not the problem that my colleagues on the left and media outlets made it out to be. The United States military is tasked with one mission: maintaining mission critical readiness to protect the American homeland. Sowing our armed forces with divisive rhetoric designed to pit races and genders against one another is not only morally wrong, it poses a very real threat to our national security. Under the Biden regime, DEI instruction and management has reached new heights that threaten to weaken the bond between America's armed forces and its civilian leadership, and undermine our military effectiveness and readiness. All of our men and women in uniform deserve to have the best tools needed to carry out their mission to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. Unfortunately, liberal ideology undermines this mission. In order to stand up to China, Russia, terrorists, our military needs to project strength. not cultural wokeness. My amendment does exactly that. I urge the adoption of this amendment. Mr. Chair, I reserve.
Colorado reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from Hawaii seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I claim time in opposition.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I yield myself such time as I may consume. Mr. Chair, to be clear, January 6th was an attack on America, our democracy, and this institution which we have all taken an oath to serve. This shouldn't be controversial, but service members who swear an oath to the Constitution should not try to overthrow the United States government. Yet the latest report from the Department of Defense Inspector General found that 78 service members were alleged to have advocated for the overthrow of the government in the past year alone. That is likely an undercount given reported challenges in gathering and compiling data across the military departments. Clearly, extremism in the military remains a persistent and serious issue, one that we should not take lightly, again, given the January 6th insurrection in which we know some service members and veterans participated. This fact alone should be deeply concerning to every single one of us in this chamber. Instead of taking this problem seriously, this amendment prohibits the Department of Defense from implementing recommendations designed to counter extremist activity in our military. This undermines unit cohesion, the readiness of our forces, and ultimately public trust in our military. My colleagues allege that the department's efforts to counter extremist activities unfairly targets conservatives. There's nothing in the Countering Extremist Activity Working Group's final report to substantiate that allegation, because violent extremism, regardless of its political or partisan leaning, is a danger to all of us and to this democracy. But there can be no denial that far-right extremism is surging across the country at a much higher level than that of left-wing extremism. A recent study showed that violent extremist acts in the United States were far more likely to be associated with far-right ideologies like white supremacy than for any far-left alternative. In fact, the level of violence perpetrated by right-wing extremists in this country is on par with, if not higher than, that of Islamist extremists. In our country, where service members have access to critical national security information and assets, individuals motivated by extremist ideologies can pose an outside threat to our national security when they move beyond fair and legal expression of contentious issues and into subversive or even violent actions. Tackling extremism in our military is not about promoting wokeness, which my colleagues continue to be obsessed about. It's about protecting our people and our country. And that, sadly, also means preventing domestic terrorism and addressing the serious and persistent threat to our homeland. And is also about restoring public confidence and trust in one of the most important institutions in our history and society. I urge my colleagues to reject this dangerous amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to reiterate quickly that this is fewer than 100 service members who have been targeted here, and that's only 0.005% of the approximately 2.1 million active and reserve personnel serving. Ultimately, wokeness, it weakens our military. Violent left-wing extremists stormed the field yesterday at the congressional baseball game. And in 2020, they burned down our cities. They say that we're obsessed with wokeness. They're obsessed with January 6th, which their speaker admitted that she did not have our facility properly secured. And Mr. Chair, I would like to yield the remainder of my time to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Corey Mills.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I just want to point out once again, as a United States Army combat veteran, I had served with people from different race, creeds, genders. None of that mattered. We all bled green. When we went to Iraq, we went to Afghanistan, we were sitting in Kosovo. Not once did we talk about who did you vote for, what religion do you follow, what gender do you identify as. We were a cohesive unit that believed in service. And I think that the DEI, which was actually passed in last year's NDAA in the House, should actually show that we're ready to close this because it's caused division, not inclusion. I think that we're a much stronger military with the greater recruitment efforts when you talk about the 41,000 deficit that we're seeing today, when we are prioritizing the ideas of coming together, fighting a common enemy, training as one. This is what mattered to our United States military when we strengthen ourselves, not the ideas of trying to identify ourselves as being something different, but as being one. That's what the military that I served in, that's what the military I believe in, and we need to stop allowing our militaries to only think about serving political agendas and get back to what they're supposed to do, which is serving our country. I've seen nothing but division through DEI. And one of those examples that we talk about is that we want to try and make sure everyone has a right to their own opinions. But the reality is that Tyler Boyer had a turning point event where military members attended and were actually refused to go because of being conservatives.
Gentleman's time has expired.
We need to be a stronger military. I support this amendment. I ask our colleagues to do the same.
I yield.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Gentlelady from Hawaii is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield myself as much time as is remaining.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you. As we previously heard, first of all, let's be clear here. We are not talking about DEI, which once again, this is an obsession of the far right in this particular body. And I would agree with you, though, in that same context of that conversation. I think we are in agreement. This is about how we should serve as one united nation. How do we serve as the United States of America as a whole? The bottom line is when we take a look at the kinds of extremist activity that is happening within our military that was found by the Countering Extremist Activity Working Group, this is not bringing our country together. This is not allowing us to stand under one common flag. A 2020 Military Times poll found that more than half of minority service members of color, say they have personally witnessed examples of white nationalism or ideologically driven racism within the ranks. And as we can recall, in June 2020, a service member of the 173rd Airborne Brigade with white supremacist leanings lead classified troop movements to facilitate an attack on his own unit while deployed to Turkey. Let's be clear here. The recommendations of the Countering Extremist Activity Working Group are not controversial. They include enhancing insider threat analysis and response, developing comprehensive training and education for departmental leadership, providing notice to personnel on prohibitive activities, and improving internal information sharing and coordination. I think we can all agree in this body, no matter what side of the aisle you sit on, this is good for us if we are truly trying to stand up to China, to Russia, and North Korea. How do we make ourselves truly a United States Department of Defense, not one that is currently divided by internal rifts, internal extremism that sadly we are seeing too often in the field and in our ranks. So with that, Mr. Chair, I strongly encourage all of our colleagues to vote against this amendment and to make sure that we can, in fact, be a strong, united president standing against our adversaries across the globe. I yield back.
Last thing I'll mention is that the Milcon VA bill, has been noted, is on the floor. First appropriations bill of FY 2025. It fully funds veterans' health care and benefits programs. It bolsters our national security at a very important time. Refocuses the executive branch by prohibiting enforcement of woke DEI policies and the use of funds on promoting critical race theory. Protects the Second Amendment rights of veterans. Prevents taxpayer dollars from being used for abortions. And all the commitments that the American people expect us to maintain here will do. But yesterday, the White House said, no surprise, it'll veto the legislation. Sends a terrible signal to our nation's allies and to our adversaries. The president's push toward radical and woke policies is continuing threat to our national security. We shouldn't be using the military for this, and everybody knows it. His agenda is changing the focus of the military. It is undermining our readiness, and it's rejecting the promises made to our veterans. We need the president to reverse course on this because we've got to prioritize America's strength and safety. It may never have been important. It certainly hasn't been more important to do that in any previous time in our lifetime. And this is the stakes couldn't be higher.
Burchett from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I ask for unanimous consent to enter into the record the Bloomberg article titled "Corporate America Promised to Hire a Lot More People of Color. It Actually Did."
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Attorney General Rokita, following George Floyd's death, there were many companies that made promises to hire and promote more black folks and others from underrepresented groups. Does that sound familiar?
Yes, Congressman.
Well, what do you think of those promises?
Well, you know, aspirations are one thing, and I could just tell you that in my own hiring practices, where I said, look, during my testimony, we have 400 people. We look for diversity. I want diversity of thought. It makes for better cases. It makes for better arguments. It makes for better attorneys. It makes for better office. But I'm not going to do that by discriminating against another person. That is against the law. It's against Title VII. and it's short-sighted and ignorant.
I often say, put the best player in, coach. That's what we need. Bloomberg collected data from 2021 for 88 Standard & Poor's 100 companies. In total, those companies increased their workforce by 323,094 people. Of the 323,094 jobs, only 20,524, or 6%, went to white workers. The other 94% went to the people of color. Mr. Berry, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act prohibits discrimination based on race, color, or national origin. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Do you know what percentage of the U.S. is white, non-Hispanic?
So the statistic that's been discussed today is approximately 59 or 60%.
Okay, I had 57, but I'll go with that. How is it possible that these companies only hire 6% of white folks without using discriminatory hiring practices?
My rough and ready statistical analysis would be that it is extremely implausible that that would be done without intentional discrimination.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Wiley, in your written statement, you said that so-called war on woke is a danger to democracy and to all progress we have made as a society that has benefited us all. How does corporate America using discriminatory practices against white people benefit us all?
Discrimination doesn't benefit anyone, ever.
Okay.
And the good news here is that's why corporations have been voluntarily taking steps to ensure that they're not discriminating.
Okay.
And that's what we want them to keep doing.
Okay, thank you. Yes or no? You also say attacks against woke radicals are based in a desire to keep us back to the 1950s when black people were segregated. Is that?
Yes.
Okay. Attorney General Rokita, as someone who fights against unequal and discriminatory workplace practices, do you believe the critics of the DEI movement are radicals that want to bring us back to the 50s, or are they just upholding Title VII of the Civil Rights Act?
Clearly, Congressman, they're upholding Title VII, they're upholding the rule of law, and they're keeping things fair for everyone.
What about you, Mr. Berry?
100%. This was non-discrimination and colorblindness are baked into the statute, and that's exactly what we try to vindicate.
Okay, and so how should the EEOC combat these corporate DEI programs?
The EEOC should apply the black letter law and find that attempts to change the racial complexion by these racial balancing schemes are unlawful, as Title VII has always held.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield the rest of my time to Representative Green.
Representative Green.
Thank you. Listening today to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle charging Republicans with racism, hate, saying that we discriminate against people from the LGBTQ community or based on race has been appalling today. And I'm sorry for the witnesses that have had to hear that. I'm sorry to the American people. That should not be happening. I don't think anyone stood in line to pick their race or chose if they wanted to be a man or a woman or what color hair or any kind of physical feature before they were born. That's not something that any of us picked. But I will say that America has gotten a lot of things right, and Title VII of the Civil Rights Act has done an incredible job with the black letter law. And it's being violated every single day. Mr. Chairman, I yield back the remainder of the time.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair now recognizes Ms. Norton Holmes from Washington, D.C.
To go back to the tragedy from yesterday, it feels like it's a circle and there's no answer to it. I don't think I need it, do I?
It may be able to hear you a little bit.
So we've got higher institutions that are cranking out teachers that are woke and
yes.
Healthcare workers that are woke and social workers that are all woke.
And military generals that act like they're woke.
Military. Who's helping these children? How do we stop that? Is it possible to get the federal money out of these higher institutions that are only seen to exist for that money?
Answer, yes. Actually, and I mentioned this maybe earlier before you arrived. That's what shutting down the Department of Education is all about, though. Because it ties into a different reason to do the same thing. $80 billion of our money is going to a federal agency that says you don't get that money as a local school or a university unless you adopt those toxic racial and gender ideologies. And it's worth people understanding where the Department of Education came from in the first place. Its original purpose was, after the Civil Rights Acts, to make sure that Southern schools in certain Southern states weren't siphoning money from predominantly black school districts to white ones. That's how it began. But somehow that morphed into saying that you don't get this money unless you're adopting toxic racial and gender ideologies in your schools. That's a lot of where this is coming from. So go to the head of the snake and actually shut it down. In our military, clean house at the Pentagon, where a lot of this poison has begun. At the FBI, I'm just saying incremental reform, shut it down. Take the 20,000 bureaucrats and send them home. The 15,000 cops on the front lines will move them to the DEA or the U.S. Marshals, which have actually been far more effective at fighting child sex trafficking rings or the fentanyl epidemic. So you have to be willing. It starts with, wokeness begins with bureaucracy, actually. Get in there and shut that bureaucracy down. The rest of it automatically melts away. And then some of this is an actual civil rights violation. And you know what? You have to apply the laws even-handedly. Those are federal laws. Now, I'm at the school. You're not supposed to say this, but it's my belief, and it's my view. I should share it with you if it is. I don't think we need those protected classes at all for race and gender and sexual orientation and religion and national origin. Today, no doubt about it, they're doing more harm than good. They're actually creating more discrimination than actually facilitating it. So I would say get the heck rid of it altogether. But if we're going to have it, you got to apply the laws even-handedly. And what you're seeing right now, forcing people to bend the knee to these ideologies, is a violation of those civil rights statutes. So you can't have it both ways. And so I'll also instruct my Attorney General to actually make sure that anytime you see those civil rights violations where people are bending the knee, they actually are applying that law even-handedly. Do we have time for one more? Okay. It would take
I wrote it for you. By His Spirit, we decree. I wrote this song for you. Blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. You give us power. You give us power. To enforce. Push back the devil in the arm of the Lord. I wrote this for you. War's been won by nothing that we've done. We stand and enforce. 'Cause Jesus, our victory. From age to age, you remain King of Kings, the King of Kings. You rule and reign. Yours is the kingdom, yours is the glory, and we occupy with holy authority. You give us power to enforce, push back the devil. I wrote this for you. We've got the might of the Lord. Love is the weapon. Love is the weapon. And it's already won. Already Jesus won. Says already won. Sing with me. We're going to sing it together now. You learn it.
It's probably out there on YouTube or somewhere. Okay. What an honor it is to have the 45th President of the United States, my friend, President Donald J. Trump, with us again this year. And thank you to Dr. Ralph Reed, for your leadership serving as a torchbearer for the faith community in America. Also, thank you, friends and partners of the America First Policy Institute, and many of us are speaking here this week. And to every one of you, it's a blessing and distinct honor to be here with some of America's strongest voices for faith, freedom, and liberty in the public square. Today, we proclaim that Christianity is alive and well in America. So many Christians have withdrawn from the public and cultural spheres. Now is not a time to withdraw, but rather to double down. Do you agree with that? Okay. As Christians, we have been called to the intersection of faith and culture in a society that is targeting our children every day with false ideology, gender confusion, and skin color shame. Now is the time for Christians to join the fight to preserve our nation and safeguard our children. You agree with that? Okay. The woke ideology is a lie from the enemy. The biblical mandate seeks cultural transformation, and we move forward to occupy, advance, and enforce God's kingdom. Our battle is not with flesh and blood. We face a spiritual victory in every generation, in every decade, and on every platform, on our knees and on our feet, under the power and leadership of the Holy Spirit. Do you agree? Y'all are so quiet today. Okay. Remember, the battle is already won by Jesus. Okay, really? You got it? We are more than what? Okay, y'all have a Bible. Praise the Lord. Victory belongs to the Lord. Forget the false narrative of separate races. Ginger Howard, are you out there? We're not colorblind. We have that book. And the dream of Martin Luther King is alive for everyone. We must learn to live together as brothers and sisters. Love, repent, forgive. Mama B, you out there? As one blood, one human race, and not perish together as fools. Friends, let's lock shields together, voting in unity and agreement, advocating for all people to have equal access and opportunity to achieve the American dream from the womb to the tomb and beyond. The dream must include protections for our unborn babies, the poor, the old, the young, the sick, for everyone. In closing, let's say a belated happy Father's Day to the dads, the grandparents, the mentors, and everybody. Let's remember the second anniversary of the overturn of Roe v. Wade. And wow. And to the liberating effects and impact of Juneteenth. Because, you know, if we don't remember our past, we'll forget it. And we can build on the good foundations and fix the stuff that didn't work, right? Okay. As we advance the message of the gospel. May God bless you, and may God truly bless America. Now, I've got a couple of minutes left. So there's a song that we sing in the black community, but Father Frank and I, and he's not black, he's Italian, we sing it for the babies too. And then we're going to end with God Bless America and sing that together. Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Look up, lift every voice and sing. Don't fight over it. Why we got to have two anthems? We don't. Now, we can sing many songs, right? Is it okay? Do y'all only sing one song at your church? And that's it, nothing else. You just sing one song. So stop fighting over stuff like that. Now, would you put your right hand over your heart and raise the other hand? And let's just sing the last line of God Bless America and sing it together. God bless America, my home. My home, sweet home. Amen. Give God a hand clap.
2 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Bean, Chairman of the Subcommittee on Early Childhood, Elementary, and Secondary Education.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you very much, Chair Fox. Madam Speaker, do you remember the 1970s? It was a decade of bell-bottom pants, lava lamps, and disco. But the 70s went beyond fads. Profound changes to societal norms took root, particularly for women, in 1972. In 1972, women were paid 60% less than men. Single women couldn't buy a home without a cosigner. Even more jarring, only 1 in 27 girls participated in high school sports. But the tide began to turn that year with the passage of Title IX. The monumental legislation leveled the playing field to ensure women and girls have an equal opportunity in education and sports. More than just throwing a ball, playing a sports means learning lifelong skills, leadership, teamwork, and discipline. And Title IX paved the way for girls to compete and lead in athletics. It's been 52 years since 1972, yet Democrats are trying to reverse many decades of revolutionary change by allowing men to compete against women. It's what the woke progressive mob calls equality. But every time a male takes a lane in a pool, a spot on a field, or on the starting line, a female athlete loses the opportunity to compete. Madam Speaker, that doesn't sound very equal to me. There's a reason that men's sports and women's sports are separate. The inclusion of men into women's sports breaches the privacy of all athletes, compromises fairness and safety, and subverts opportunities for women. Madam Speaker, today, I say no to men competing in women's sports. I say no to men in women's locker rooms. I say no to men in women's showers. And I say no to the Biden administration's proposed changes that will allow all of this when they try to change Title IX. That's why today, Madam Speaker, we're in a battle of survival of women's sports, and we have to pass a resolution. I stand in support of the resolution and ask for your help. Let's go get it done. I yield back. Thank you.
The gentlelady yields back. Gentlelady reserve. The gentlelady reserve.
Thank you, Madam President. On October 23, 1983, terrorists killed 241 Americans, including 220 Marines in Beirut, Lebanon. Last night, Israeli Defense Forces reportedly killed a top Hamas leader responsible for those American lives lost. The events of last night highlight why the Senate needs to now move on the NDAA to strengthen our military and our allies abroad. Instead, Senator Schumer has done nothing this week but bring low-level nominations to the floor while the bipartisan NDAA gathers dust on his desk. It's par for the course for Senator Schumer. Democrats ride the fence on this because Hamas is a key constituent of the Democratic Party. It's why Kamala Harris couldn't bring herself to show up for the Prime Minister Netanyahu's congressional address just last week. It's why the Biden administration has flushed Iran with cash, and now Iran is bankrolling terrorism all over the Middle East. But they act surprised when the Middle East is destabilized. They're more concerned about appeasing our enemies than supporting our friends and our allies. Now Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have brought us to the world order and possibly World War III. It's the weakest administration in the history of the United States of America. We've become a complete joke in the eyes of the world, which is why, Mr. President, I rise today to call on Senator Schumer to immediately bring the NDAA to the floor for a vote. Senator Schumer has refused to act on this legislation since it passed out of committee on June the 13th with bipartisan support. After the events last night, It is imperative now more than ever that we move this bill. Senator Schumer, let's be serious here. If you really care about our military, you will bring the NDAA up for a vote immediately. Stop wasting our time on messaging bills that are a ploy to bail out vulnerable Democratic colleagues in an election. We need a military that is 100% focused on protecting our country and enhancing our national security, not implementing the Biden-Harris woke agenda, which is why I've taken steps to return our military to the greatness in this year's NDAA. Among these victories, I count my amendments which will help refocus the Pentagon on its stated mission to deter war and ensure our nation's security. One of these amendments includes eliminating all funding for the woke, diversity, equity, and inclusion programs at the DOD. Another amendment prohibits the use of taxpayer dollars from being spent on transgender surgeries or any other costs associated with these surgeries. I appreciate my colleagues on the committee supporting these common sense amendments that were included in this year's Senate NDAA. I, along with millions of Americans, am scratching my head as to why the DOD has implemented these policies to begin with. Sadly, no institutions, not even our great military, are safe from infiltration by the Biden-Harris regime's radical woke policies. Immediately after taking the White House, the Joe Biden and Kamala Harris weaponized the DOD, using it as yet another tool in their arsenal to further their progressive agenda. One of the Biden-Harris administration's first moves was mandating diversity, equity, and inclusion training in all the DOD. On day one, the Biden-Harris administration announced that the military would begin conducting training, quote, have knowledge of systemic and institutional racism and bias against underserved communities, end quote. This hateful ideology has no place in the United States, let alone our military. The military is not a social experiment. It should be a lethal fighting force, feared by our enemies and comprised of our best and brightest. The military should be built on merit, not diversity. It is dangerous and insulting to waste our troops' valuable time on political indoctrination such as this, and that's not all. In 2021, the Biden administration announced it would begin directing taxpayer dollars to pay for hormone therapy and transgender surgeries for service members who want to transition to a different gender. It is not the job of the taxpayers to pay for someone to get a controversial elective procedure. American taxpayers' resources should ensure troops who are injured or sick get quality health care timely as they need it. And taxpayers should not be forced to bankroll these dangerous experimental procedures that often backfire. Of course, the Biden-Harris administration would rather spend valuable taxpayer dollars on programs that affirm its progressive worldview. The DEI and transgender surgery policies at the DOD are just two examples of the woke policies being implemented. We can't forget that the Biden-Harris DOD illegally mandated taxpayer dollars to fund elective abortions in the military. I have spent the better part of 2 years fighting the Biden-Harris administration on this front, and we cannot forget the Biden-Harris DOD fired more than 8,000 able-bodied troops for refusing to take the COVID-19 vaccine. None of these policies should be DOD priorities. It is a distraction from keeping America safe and secure, and the consequences are dangerous. For decades, support for the U.S. military was one of the few topics that brought Republicans and Democrats together. In the past years, the U.S. House of Senate Armed Services Committee would draft the NDAA, which was authorized funding for the military, and established policies, priorities for the DOD. These bills were largely bipartisan and not usually controversial. Both parties were united in the belief that the United States military should be the most lethal fighting force in the world. There were some policy differences here, and there sure should be, but both parties largely left politics out of the military. This until the Biden-Harris administration came to town. It's disappointing we've reached a point where we need to legislatively intervene to refocus the Pentagon on its mission to protect and defend our great country. But here we are. Predictably, the Biden-Harris regime injecting politics into our military has come at a price. The departure from bipartisan common sense policies at the DOD has resulted in detrimental impacts to military readiness and lethality. Take recruitment, for example. In 2023, the Pentagon announced that it fell way short of recruitment goals in what it referred to as, quote, the toughest recruitment year for the military service since the inception of the all-volunteer Army, end quote. I would ask, why would young men and women volunteer to serve in a country and in our military if it's become a place of the far-left indoctrination? Why would they do that? Why would young men and women join a military that teaches them to hate our country? Why would any patriotic citizen join an organization that is more committed to social justice than defeating our enemies? I must say, I share their concerns. The military under today's regime is not the same military that my dad served in over 60 years ago. It's the sad truth. The recruiting failure has resulted in a national security emergency. As a member of the Armed Services Committee, I have asked our top military leaders about the decision to focus on woke policies instead of addressing the recruiting crisis. Unsurprisingly, they didn't have an answer for me. And the impact of implementing those left-wing social priorities extends far beyond the recruiting problems here at home.
The senator's time has expired.
These dangerous policies, Madam President, at the DOD have consequences for our military readiness and the world stage.
We have every right as a state to provide protections for employees and businesses to say if they are doing woke training, which is basically discriminating against folks on basis of race, you have right to opt out of that. It's not a question of what the company can say. They can say whatever they want. But you have a right to not have to self-flagellate. You have a right to not have to sit there and listen to that nonsense. And so we were right on that. We're also right in being able to say that the woke agenda is not consistent with what we want in education standards at our taxpayer-funded universities. We have every right to set standards. We have every right to say, here's what we want to do. Here's some of the things that we're not going to do with your tax dollars. But as all these things go, you know, we typically go, I can't count on my hands the number of times they've run in, got a judge to do that, and then we end up winning on appeal. Remember, the one case which I acknowledge was the closest was on the internet censorship, social media censorship. We did this a couple years ago. We did protections for Floridians. They can't discriminate against you and kick you off or censor you just because you're saying things that the big tech companies don't like. You know, they don't want conservative speech as much as they want liberal speech, particularly now that we're in an election cycle. So we just provided protections. We said you can have standards and rules about what you're going to do, but you got to apply it evenly. And if you're applying it with a thumb on the scale against one part, certain viewpoints, then people have a right to be able to have some protection. And, you know, we lost in district court, lost appeal. U.S. Supreme Court has kicked that back now to the district court. And we'll see what happens. I mean, it's probably going to go on and on. The whole gender surgeries for minors. We said not going to fly in Florida. We're not going to allow that to happen. There's a lot of people making a lot of money off this. And you take some teenager and you cut off private parts, and then they get into their 20s and they can't reverse it. And it becomes a big, big problem. And it's not based in science. It's based in ideology. And so the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals has already said that states have a right to do this. And even in face of that, we had a judge strike Florida's down. We're going to win that on appeal for sure because the circuit's already ruled on that, and we'll be better off. And many countries are now backtracking off of that because it is motivated by ideology, and it's motivated by a lust for profit and a lust for financial gain, because there's people that make a whole lot of money based off this, and it's really, really been detrimental to so many people. So all these things kind of work out, but the end of the day, we have every right as a state to say that of all the different things you have when you go to work, that you can't be forced to sit there and have to listen to this dribble. You can opt out. They can do it. They can say it. Nothing's being restricted there, but you're right to say, not for me. That should be protected. Same thing with our educational institutions. We have a right to focus on things that are meaningful. We have a right to pursue truth, and we have a right to have standards that say that accordingly. And so, and I think if you look, Columbia University, you look at some of these agencies that we have in government, you look at corporations, some of them, once they get infected and captured by the woke mind virus, the institutions just crumble, and they become hollow shells of what they were supposed to be. And what we're doing when we say where woke goes to die, it's because we don't want our institutions to be infected with woke ideology. We want our institutions to be rooted in truth. We want our institutions to be rooted in what's right. And as long as you're doing that and you're strong on that, you have a chance to do very well. The minute you go into these other things where all of a sudden people get elected district attorney and they release criminals or they refuse to prosecute criminals, crime goes up. Well, actually, the crime statistics don't go up because what they start doing, they stop reporting crimes. So they say, oh, this crime is down in all these cities that everyone's scared to walk down the street in. No, it's not that crime is down. It's that the reporting is down because, first of all, if you get mugged in some of these places, it's not even worth reporting it. There's never going to prosecute somebody for that. There's also the agencies don't want to take in the stuff. So it's not that people are actually safer in those places, but that's a great example. Well, how destructive has that been with Soros pouring in money to these district attorneys' races, and then all of a sudden the criminals are able to rule the roost in some of our previously greatest cities in this country. It just doesn't work. All the universities, Columbia University, you see some of the nonsense that goes on there. That doesn't fly in Florida, I can tell you that. You want to try to take over, you want to try to commandeer parts of our university, you're going to be ejected from the premises immediately. We're just not going to put up with it. We're not going to let the inmates run the asylum. But part of the reason that's happened in those places is because it's all about ideology. And this is what's happened. So I think that you need to have a solid foundation for everything you do. And if you're just indulging in the latest ideological fad, you just can't succeed over the short, medium, or long term in that respect. And look, some of it is just, it's a reflection of the times we live in. I look at this Olympics opening ceremony, and honestly, like, I wasn't necessarily, I don't get offended. People say things that I disagree with all the time, but I was just sad seeing this. It's like, that was really a symbol of the decline of Western civilization. I don't think on the closing ceremony they're going to do anything where they mock Islam. I don't think that's going to happen. I'd be willing to bet a lot of money that doesn't happen. And so when they're doing that, and they're mocking the Last Supper like that, it just shows that so much of, particularly Western Europe, they've really walked away from the values that once made those countries great. And so we're in that battle here in the United States and have been for many, many years about are we going to be rooted in truth? Are we going to be rooted in things that have real serious meaning? And, of all the things that you can say is we've put our stake in the ground here in Florida very strong, and people have responded by us being the top destination for people to want to move to. So there you go. Thanks.
Good evening, America. I'm Congressman Brian Mast. Now, I've got to start with a salute to every warrior standing guard around the globe on an aircraft carrier, in a foxhole, on a base somewhere, in this audience, or just watching from home. We love you, veterans. We love them. We love them. I, too, am an Army veteran, a husband, a father of 4. I lost 2 legs and a finger in the war in Afghanistan, but nothing could stop me from standing alongside Donald Trump and fighting for America. Every one of you American service members and every veteran knows the dangers when we join the armed forces, but we risk our lives because we believe in America. As president, Donald Trump rebuilt our military, deterred our enemies, and he made America strong again. Now, I'm not here to sugarcoat it. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have once again weakened our armed forces, and through inflation slashed the size of our military budget, just like they slashed the family budget. And at the same time, they've distracted our troops with millions of hours of so-called extremism training, and they've based promotions on adherence to left-wing political ideology rather than merit. They would rather lose a war than use the wrong pronouns, and we've had enough. Donald Trump knows that our military needs warriors and not woke weaklings lecturing our warriors. Biden and Harris's weakness invites aggression, and our enemies are on the march. Russia invaded Ukraine, Hamas attacked Israel, Iran is funding terror across the Middle East, and the Chinese Communist Party has Taiwan in their crosshairs. And with his botched withdrawal from Afghanistan, Biden delivered what President Trump rightly called the most embarrassing day in American history. And what's worse is that Joe Biden doesn't even remember that it cost the lives of 13 American heroes. But when their coffins arrived at Dover, he did remember to check his watch, didn't he? Nearly 2,500 of my brothers and sisters gave their lives in that war. Joe Biden disgraced their sacrifice and the sacrifice of all Afghanistan veterans. Kamala Harris stood with him when he did. Neither deserves to be saluted as commander-in-chief or to sit in the Oval Office. American veterans and American service members deserve better. America deserves better. And with Donald Trump, you know that we don't just get better, we get the best. Donald Trump restored American strength before. Donald Trump will restore American strength again. And with your vote, we won't just make America strong again. We will make America stronger than it's ever been. May God bless you. God bless our troops. And God bless the United States of America.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the final frontier of the woke mind virus is the banks and capitalism themselves. It has already tarnished America's other institutions. Last week, House Republicans passed H.R. 5339, the Protecting Americans' Investments from Woke Policies Act, a bill that would confront and dispatch one of the most nefarious and hidden forms of wokeness, environmental, social, and governance investing, or ESG for short. In his book, Go Woke, Go Broke, author Charles Gasparino punctures the woke mind virus and ESG. And Mr. Speaker, I'd like to enter into the record the book review of Go Woke, Go Broke.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. He describes ESG and diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, as, quote, among the most heinously anti-American management philosophies ever developed, end quote. This book amplifies the points we made when we passed our legislation last week. ESG is an ideological cancer buoyed by asset managers, banks, and financial institutions that kneel at the altar of anti-capitalism. Americans saving for retirement don't want to see their hard-earned money go up in flames in ESG funds. They want a sizable return on their investments. We need to embrace true capitalism again in America. This woke garbage needs to be put out to pasture and left to die. I yield back.
Gentlewoman.
The great state of Tennessee. And with that, I yield time to a man of congenial disposition, Mr. Burchett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker, President Biden's $7.3 trillion budget proposal for fiscal year 2025 is full of costly, woke policies that will end up hurting the Americans who elected us to office. Here's some of the things he wants. $895 billion for defense. It comes as no secret in the history of audits that our Pentagon has never passed an audit. And how did we punish them this last budgetary cycle? $20 billion more dollars. Of course, that's $9 billion more for defense than we spent this year. $8 billion for the American Climate Corps. We're not sure what that is. $3 billion for the State Department to advance gender equity and equality worldwide. Worldwide, Mr. Speaker. President Trump asked for $4 billion to help secure the border, and we said he couldn't have it because, as our friends across the aisle said, that would bust the budget. $1.5 billion for the Environmental Protection Agency's Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights. There's so much more, but we don't have all day to go over every item. President Biden also claims this budget would lower the deficit. We all know that's a lie. But think about how that happens. If he is spending more money and lowering the deficit, it means he plans to significantly increase the government's revenue. How does he do that? By taking more taxes. His plan would raise taxes by nearly $5 trillion. And of course, he claims no one making less than $400,000 per year will pay more taxes. But we have seen what this promise has done so far in the past. If he's making companies pay more in taxes, these companies, of course, need to make up for the lost profit. So they charge us more for gas, food, energy, and other essentials we use every day. To put it better, Mr. Speaker, companies collect taxes. That's what they do. Corporations collect taxes, and they pass it on to us. Even if Americans don't pay more in taxes, they will pay for this plan somehow. If we don't do them any good unless they want to get one of these new government jobs that will focus on climate change or diversity, equity, and inclusion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield the remainder of my time.
I recognize myself for my closing statement. Today, we've heard powerful testimonies from the Attorneys General of 3 states who are dealing with the consequences of Secretary Mayorkas' border crisis. I want to thank you all for being here and for your testimony, and of course, I'll thank Mr. Bowman for being here as well. As our witnesses made it abundantly clear, every state is now a border state. And why are we here? We're here because Secretary Mayorkas' policies were exploited by the drug cartels and have done incredible damage to the United States. Those policies were in violation of the laws passed by this Congress. The Congress said the INA detain, parole's an exception based on extreme circumstances, not 85%, as the Secretary says, is now just being released into the country willy-nilly. It's a violation of law. And interestingly enough, so he's disregarded the Congress. He's also disregarded the judiciary branch. 4 court rulings said cease and desist because you're breaking the law. I'm sorry, I took the oath at age 17 to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. The oath wasn't to the American people. It wasn't to defend the landmass or the flag. It was to defend the Constitution. This secretary took the same oath to defend the Constitution. Well, I'm sorry, but I think the Constitution of the United States says we write the laws and not him get to pick and choose whatever the heck he wants to when he, as the executive branch, gets to execute the laws. He is to execute the laws as written. That is the Constitution he took an oath to. 4 court orders, cease and desist because you're breaking the law, and he disregards the judiciary branch and continues his policy. In fact, he doubles down, creating more policies that do even more catch and release, which is why I think it's intentional. He's abusing his position to force his woke immigration policies on the United States of America, despite the fact that Congress is supposed to fix those immigration laws. On top of that, back on script now. On top of that, Secretary Mayorkas knows full well the consequences of these policies, but instead, he's reversing course, he's doubling down. It's worse. He's been to the border. He's seen the numbers. He's seen the fentanyl seizures. He's met with the grieving families. He knows about the cartels. He knows about the human trafficking and the child exploitation, yet he doesn't change a thing. In fact, as I said, he admitted to the Border Patrol the other day in a closed meeting, 85% are being released. Despite the intentionality behind this open border, Secretary Mayorkas is attempting to skirt the consequences of his actions. He has continuously tried to deflect, blaming climate change, wars in Latin America, non-existent DHS budget cuts. Well, there have been no budget cuts. And what is the cost of Secretary Mayorkas' border crisis? Fentanyl poisoning is killing thousands of young people every year. We learned from Attorney General Bailey that a total of 43 Missouri children died from accidental. They didn't have a choice. We had a testimony over here if Americans would just stop using drugs. Those little babies didn't have a choice. That baby on a VRBO in Florida certainly didn't have a choice. She wasn't able to just say no. My heart breaks for this baby and her parents. Because of this border crisis, thousands of mothers won't get to see their kids graduate. Thousands of fathers won't be able to walk their daughters down the aisle at those weddings. As a parent myself, that breaks my heart. That's the human cost. And apparently I need to explain to my colleagues, while it is accurate that most of the fentanyl is seized at the CBP, intercepted at the official points of entry, this is because those facilities are equipped for that purpose. Yet, we also know that drugs are coming across between ports of entry. It simply isn't being caught. This is because Border Patrol agents are tied up processing people at the crossing sites. And it's not like we can put the entire border as an X-ray machine or a CT scanner. And while my Democrat colleagues may not believe me, I hope that they will believe those on the front lines. Border Patrol agents have told us that drugs coming between the ports of entry is a key driver of the rising fentanyl crisis. Why else has fentanyl gone on the street from $98 a hit to $25 a hit after this secretary came into office? It's because of the simple supply and demand of coming across the southern border. We've also heard that from federal officials that they believe they only apprehend roughly 5 to 10% of the fentanyl coming in. So that's from the border. They're only catching 5 to 10%. What really matters here isn't how much fentanyl is caught, but how much fentanyl is flooding the neighborhoods. We got 3 guys here from 3 states, just discredited by the ranking member, but they're here to testify what's happening in their states. And you know what? Some of us heard you. Some of us heard you. People are dying because of this. Because of Secretary Mayorkas' border crisis, cities and states nationwide struggle to pay first responders while health care and education systems falter. In fact, medical care for undocumented aliens will cost $7 billion this year. We also heard from Attorney General Drummond about the organized criminal operations and that some illegal aliens run once they arrive. He shared that in Oklahoma alone, the AG office prosecuted 50 complex, multi-jurisdictional criminal cases, most of them involving Mexican and Chinese drug cartels coming across the southern border. Make no mistake, these human trafficking and drug trafficking rings are sophisticated, and they've taken a foothold in the United States because of our open border. Finally, we can't negate the credible threat this open border poses to our national security. With emboldened Islamic terrorist groups and an increasingly aggressive Communist Chinese party, we have to wonder how many bad actors are in that 1.8 million known gotaways and how many are in the unknown gotaways. Well, we won't know until something tragic happens. When we embarked on this investigation almost a year ago, we knew there would be roadblocks and that it would be a formidable challenge. No matter how hard this process gets, Homeland Republicans will not back down. The American people deserve answers, accountability, and ultimately an end to the border crisis. Look, if you have a secretary, a cabinet secretary, who breaks the laws or refuses to obey the laws of Congress, refuses to adhere to the rulings of a judiciary, the cease and desist orders from a judge, I mean, that's lawlessness on his own part. If it were me, a Republican, I'd expect to be impeached. You can't have cabinet secretaries that just decide to do whatever the heck they want to do. The Committee on Homeland Security has made every effort to ensure that this investigation was thorough. We do not take this lightly. The Homeland Security Committee spent almost a year, countless hours. We held 10 hearings. We heard from 24 witnesses, released 5 reports totaling 300 pages. We conducted numerous transcribed interviews, border chiefs, multiple visits to the border to see for ourselves. I don't hold any personal animosity towards Secretary Mayorkas, but I sure as hell don't want to see him continue as Secretary of Homeland Security, not after the pain and turmoil and chaos his policies have inflicted on the American people. And when congressional oversight demonstrates beyond a shadow of a doubt that executive branches are neglecting their duty, overstepping their authority, ignoring laws passed by Congress, it is our duty to act to defend this institution, to defend the Constitution. Also, just to be clear, this is the responsibility of Congress. The Supreme Court made it clear in United States versus Texas, according to the court, and I quote, even though the federal courts lack Article III jurisdiction over the suit, other forums remain open for examining the executive branch's arrest policies. For example, Congress poses an array of tools to analyze and influence these policies. Those are political checks for a political process, end quote. So not only do these proceedings have the support of the House, the Supreme Court has pointed to impeachment as a source of relief for states suffering a border crisis put together, orchestrated by a secretary who is violating the laws passed by Congress and disregarding the court's orders. Now, before I end, I'd like to address a few other things my Democrat colleagues have said. Let me start with saying I'm very disappointed in the ranking member for misquoting me. He claimed that I wrote that I will not support another dime to DHS. This is inaccurate. What I wrote was I will not support another dime to DHS until the policies of H.R. 2 are signed into law and enforced by the administration. And we're talking about the supplemental. So we're not talking about the budget, which has already gone through and passed the House. We're talking about additional dollars in a supplemental. So to suggest that I would defund the Department of Homeland Security is disingenuous at best. I can tell you there have been a lot of Democrats who've said defund ICE and defund the police. I never said defund Homeland Security. And I'd also like to address the claim that Secretary Mayorkas isn't at fault here, that he isn't to blame for the economic crisis in Latin America. I agree. But poverty in Latin America is nothing new. And actually, poverty rates in Latin America have stayed flat from last administration to this one. Further, I'd like to reiterate the Democrats sent these articles to impeachment to our committee in November. They sent it to this committee. The Homeland Security Committee has the authority of the House to conduct these impeachment proceedings, and that's exactly what we're going to do. Democrats can bring up a New York Times popcorn story all they want to. They keep talking about MAGA Republicans and former President Trump this and that. But it's clear these are deflections because they have no answers for the piss-poor performance of Secretary Mayorkas and his policies. And let me just point out, my Democrat colleagues are quick to talk about kids in cages under Trump, but did a single one of them mention the 85,000 missing UACs under President Biden? Of course not. The hypocrisy in this room is palpable. And of course, our guide should always be the intent of the framers of our Constitution, the Founding Fathers, regarding how Constitution was intended to be understood. But too often in political debates, people can fall into inconsistency for possibly partisan reasons. I get that. For example, Professor Bowman wrote a book on impeachment in 2019 called High Crimes and Misdemeanors, A History of Impeachment for the Age of Trump. In it, he states the power of the House to impeach cabinet secretaries, quote, remains important as a signal of legislative displeasure with administrative personnel and policy, end quote. Yet today, he's testified on multiple occasions that policy alone isn't enough for an impeachment. That's what Professor Bowman wrote when Donald Trump was president, but now, in his written testimony at page 3, he writes that impeachment, and I quote, should not be attempted based on simple policy disagreements between Congress and the executive branch, end quote. I guess that was then and this is now. But let me be clear, no one is supporting impeachment of Secretary Mayorkas over policy differences. The impeachable offenses relate to violations of the law. Insisting on enforcing the law as written by Congress is not a policy difference. It is a fundamental requirement of the Constitution. Lastly, I got to tell you, I was appalled from someone on the left who suggested this has all been a waste of time. We're here today because it is our duty to provide oversight and hold the executive branch accountable. And yes, this includes the option to impeach. We cannot allow a cabinet secretary to violate the laws, disregard the constitutional structure, lie to Congress under oath, all to massive harm to the Americans and do nothing about it. And if a Republican were head of DHS and committing these same acts, I can assure you we wouldn't tolerate it from them either. It is the Homeland Security Committee's responsibility to provide oversight of DHS. This is what we were elected to do. This is what we were appointed to this committee for. Now, this might not be how you want to spend your time, but it certainly is how we must be spending our time. And I ask the members here today, in fighting to stop the needless death of children to fentanyl poisoning, a waste of time? Is it a waste of time to try to protect those kids? Is trying to stop criminal cartels from wreaking havoc on the country a waste of time? It's not. And the insinuation is appalling. What has been a waste of time, what has been a waste, the amount of taxpayer dollars this border crisis has cost, the amount of people who have died as a result of fentanyl flowing across our southern border, the amount of migrants who've lost their lives making the dangerous journey, the amount of money state and local governments have had to spend cleaning up Secretary Mayorkas' mess. This is where the real waste has been, not these official proceedings. As we continue these proceedings in the coming days, it's important that the American people remember the facts, and that this body once again embraces our constitutional responsibilities. When I took that oath as a young boy on the plane at West Point, it meant something to me then. And when I took it when the people of Tennessee sent me up here, it meant just as much, if not more. We will support the basic tenets of that document, and that is Congress writes the laws, the president executes those laws, the judiciary interprets those laws, and they have a responsibility to do their duty, and we do also. Without objection, that ends my closing statement, and without objection, the committee stands adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Woman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of H.R. 3724, the End Woke Higher Education Act. No woke week could possibly be complete without a robust debate regarding the state of free speech on college campuses. But first, I can't help but acknowledge the juxtaposition of this floor debate and debates in the university setting. The Constitution's speech or debate clause grants members of Congress the absolute freedom of speech on the House floor. It is a privilege that has survived 248 years of nationhood. Sadly, the privilege of the First Amendment and campus free speech has not. Therefore, I'd like to use this time in this pulpit to make three conservative statements to express three truths that would otherwise be punishable offenses on today's college campuses. Men and women are biologically different. This position held by swimmer Riley Gaines endangered her very life on a trip to San Francisco State University. Student activists assaulted Miss Gaines during a speaking engagement, forcing police to lead her into a safe room. DEI policies overlook qualified candidates. This sentiment, expressed in a tweet by conservative libertarian Georgetown lecturer Ilya Shapiro, led to a 122-day investigation and his eventual coerced resignation. And finally, wear what you want on Halloween. This opinion, shared in an email by Professor Erica Christakis, sparked outrage at Yale. The unchecked student overreaction drove Professor Christakis to stop teaching classes. Men and women are biologically different. DEI policies overlook qualified candidates and wear what you want on Halloween. These three statements, as unobjectionable and inoffensive as they may seem, are widely centered on college campuses. That's because for every example of retaliatory censorship, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of examples of self-censorship and social pressure to conform. That's why I support H.R. 3724. Not only does H.R. 3724 aim to protect politically disfavored speech, but all speech. To achieve this goal, it would, among other things, mandate viewpoint neutrality in the college accreditation process, require robust free speech policies before public colleges access Title IV funds, and prohibit universities from giving political litmus tests to students and faculty. Thank you, Representative Owens, Utah, Representative Williams from New York, Representative Houchin from Indiana, Representative Wahlberg from Michigan, Representative Stefanik from New York, Representative Crenshaw from Texas, Representative Kiley of California, and Murphy from North Carolina for your significant contributions to this bill. With enough like-minded members committed to the First Amendment, we can once again renew free expression as a pillar of post-secondary education. I urge a yes vote on H.R. 3724, and with that, I reserve the balance of my time.